Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Thanks so much for joining me. Another edition of CBT Now right here at the CBT Automotive Network. September marked the first time the average transaction price for new vehicles in the U.S., ready for this? Drum roll please, exceeded $50,000. I don't know where this is going. According to the latest Kelley Blue Book report. Here now is Erin Keating, executive analyst at Cox Automotive, to tell us more about this. Erin, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule there to join us on the show. We appreciate it. $50,000. Should be, there should be alarms going off in every single showroom. That is crazy that we're talking about 50 grand for a transaction price. So let's jump in here. What factors do you feel contributed to this in this record-breaking milestone here?
Well, thanks for having me, Jim. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I think, the thing to remember here is it's a nuanced market. So yes, 50,000, we've gotten over that from an average transaction price, but actually since mid-23, we've been dealing with a median price over $50,000 as well. So, averages always skew based on what we've got going on at the high end and what we've got going on the low end. So, nearly over 60 models we had in our sales data that were selling over $75,000. That was largely driven by expensive luxury EVs and a lot of EVs coming out into the market, and 2026 models coming into the market. So we know that that's usually a time where we're going to see price increases. But I would also say that there was 41 vehicles that were available under $35,000, 41 additional models that were available between $35,000 and $45,000.
Okay,
so
this is good news.
It's a mixed market. And if we have to remember that, 2022 and 2021, they created that big spike where we kind of went off of our normal trajectory of inflationary prices in the vehicle market, which we always expect, hiked them up really high. But then we've since experienced a few years where we've been low. So if you were to have taken that trend line out, you might have seen that we were getting close to this number by this point anyway, by very nature of how inflation works in the vehicle market.
Sure. Are rising prices being driven more by consumer preference or by the market itself?
Yeah, it's a couple different things. So yes, for sure, consumer preference. I mean, we know that the wealthier households are holding up the new vehicle sales. Those individuals typically like the fully outfitted, most expensive vehicles on the market. They're able to get great credit and interest rates on these things. And so again, we think that the consumer preference for those looking at new vehicles tend to be the higher trims, bigger vehicles in the US. And certainly, again, the influx of EVs that were sold when we know EVs already tend to be more expensive really impacted what the market looked like in September.
Okay, gotcha. So with affordable cars disappearing, how are price-conscious buyers adapting? Are they turning more to used vehicles because of this?
Yeah, my sense is actually that the price conscious customer is, yes, moving towards used vehicles, but also sidelining themselves. I mean, we have to remember that the average transaction price just tells you what is the total price that the vehicle costs in the market. But if you are a subprime customer, or if you are someone who has student loan debt, as an example, all of a sudden you're looking at interest rates that just are killing you on the monthly payment. And we know that most people shop by monthly payment. Add to that the cost of insurance and so on, it is becoming more difficult for that price conscious buyer to purchase new or used. And so I think we're seeing them sit on the sideline a little bit longer, waiting to see if something breaks in the industry where we see lower priced vehicles. I mean, the press release that we put out did mention the $20,000 new vehicle that went away. I think you and I could both argue that benchmark went away a long time ago. We've got that Mitsubishi Mirage hanging on for dear life. But outside of that, we really, I don't know that any consumer has thought that a new vehicle averages 20,000 or below. I think we've probably been hovering in that, let's be hopeful for 35,000, maybe 40,000 for quite some time. So I think that's why the $50,000 mark sounds really high to us. But used cars even went down just a little bit in September. So it shows us that, consumer sentiment we know is a little bit touchy right now. A couple of people are a little bit worried about the economy. And again, it's those lower income quintiles, and with interest rates just really not moving despite the Fed fund rate moving. So I think we're going to continue to see an iffy market for that price conscious consumer.
Sure. Incentive spending reached 7.4% of ATP in September, the highest point in 2025. What are manufacturers doing differently to manage incentives, and how is it affecting consumer behavior?
And this one's an interesting one because we are trending at the 7.4% of ATP and incentives. You and I've talked about this before. You know, before the pandemic, these were at 10%.
Yeah.
So what I would say that manufacturers are doing to manage it is trying to keep it within that sort of 6 to 8% max to help them manage their cost exposure on the back end and get creative. You know, for a while there, we were seeing some creative financing subvention and things like that. They're starting to dial back on that. We're not seeing as many 0%, 3% offerings. And I think for consumers, this is impacting what they're seeing is available for ways to bring the price of the car down. And that will just continue to be leaning on dealers, unfortunately, also to be thinking about discounting. And that's where we're seeing some of the forgiveness in the market is that the dealers are having to discount and give up a little bit of their margin too, to bring someone into the brand and into the dealership.
Gotcha. The average new vehicle MSRP also hit a record high. Are manufacturers pricing vehicles higher due to demand, or are other factors playing a role?
A couple different things here. So when you look at the aggregate, the average MSRP follows the same line of thinking as the average transaction price, right? So it's not everyone raising. And actually, I was quite shocked to see how many MSRPs had actually gone down over the last month. So a couple of those most expensive luxury and EV vehicles, those prices were the ones where we saw people really increasing, say, over 5% MSRP. But it is because of what's on the vehicles, what's in the vehicles. Consumer preferences have told manufacturers, hey, build those higher trim vehicles, get us the bigger vehicles. I mean, this is the one thing I consistently am not amazed by, but also still like, how is this the story, is us US consumers are incredibly picky. We say we need 4 wheels and an engine, ICE or otherwise, but at the end of the day, we want what we want, and that really puts the pressure on the manufacturers to deliver those vehicles to the market at affordable prices. And some of it's just simply not an affordable way to build a vehicle, especially when you've got the segmentation across such a big country. I mean, just nailing that allocation is really difficult.
Sure. So what are the prospects for the EV market now that the tax credits are no longer driving that growth? I mean, obviously we saw a huge spike before September 30th, and I think it was 12% of the market were EVs last month, and that was really, I think it was an eye-opener for a lot of people, because it was like, okay, but far beyond the tax incentives, that meant that 12% of the market wanted an EV, right?
And more.
Exactly. So that was an eye-opener. But what's the future hold for EVs now? Yeah,
well, raise your hand if you were one of the individuals that bought during the EV credit.
There you go.
Flourish.
There you go.
I'm sitting in a brand new. That was mine. I ended up finally going, all right, let me see this thing. And I got into the Hyundai Ioniq 9, not to promo them, but I mean, I was just like,
great car.
I've never needed a 3-row vehicle in my life, and somehow I now need it now that my kids are driving on their own. But it's just such a great car. It drives so wonderfully. So I think, there's a couple things. For sure, we're going to see a drop off in demand. It's just, it was sky high. There was a lot of incentives in the market. Secondly, we've seen a lot of the automakers come in and say that they are in fact going to continue to juice the sales of EVs. So I think we're going to continue to see some pretty decent deals out there. And then one of my favorite, I'm going to claim it's German, the German phenomenon, the Bader Meinhof phenomenon. Like, we now have an influx of new and used electric vehicles in the market. By that very nature, people are going to see more, talk more about them, be more interested. So to your point, that tells us the 12%, there were already a lot of people waiting to jump into the EV game anyway. And then that just continues to expand and expand. So I'm actually pretty bullish on the fact that as the manufacturers continue to come out with more mainstream looking models, with models across an entire product mix that meet the customer where they are as far as what kind of car they like, I think we're going to continue to see EV sales grow so long as infrastructure stays in place, people get more used to how these vehicles fuel, quote unquote, and that the manufacturers don't get too scared and pull back too much on production. I think that's going to be the big story in the fourth quarter. We're going to say, as an example, Toyota, oh no, their EV sales have gone way down. Guess what? They don't have any to sell. It's not that they've gone down. Their product, they've run out, and so why, we need to keep that in mind when we're looking at the relevant demand signals versus what's actually on the ground and even available for dealers to sell. That might be more of the story.
That's right. Yeah. So the report mentions tariffs. Here we are in mid-October. President just announced today, in fact, and I'm not sure when this is going to air, but the president just announced today 100% tariffs on China products. He was kind of in retaliation to what the president of China was mentioning. So this whole thing with tariffs, it had kind of died down for a little bit, but boy, it's on the front page now, right? So how are tariffs affecting vehicle pricing and industry strategy moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it continues to be the story of uncertainty, which gets real difficult for, chief strategy officers, CFOs. I keep saying this is like the automaker CFO, year to shine, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the time when they got to go dig deep and figure out real creative ways to make their budgets work. But let's not forget that there is a ton of tailwinds in the industry right now for the automakers. I mean, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act really created a lot of openings for producing onshore, for reducing manufacturing expenses, for allowing them to immediately write off R&D expenses, for giving commercial businesses the write-off when they purchase vehicles, incentivizing with the auto loan deduction, even if that's not going to hit every U.S. consumer. So there's a lot of different layers to what tailwinds were coming into the automaking and manufacturing business as a whole. And those EV tax credits, not just for the consumers, went away, but the liability for the automakers to pay penalties for not having enough EVs. I mean, that's a significant chunk of change that they had been having sitting in their financials for years, expecting to have to pay that cost. And now they're no longer having to pay those penalties and not having to pay one Mr. Elon Musk to buy the credits that they needed to offset that too. So I just think we need to keep in mind, I think that's why we haven't seen these crazy price increases yet. As a result of the tariffs. And the USMCA is also real critical. As you know, the Canada, Mexico, US market, that whole scenario is one of the most important for how tariffs are going to impact the US automotive business. And that has not been sorted. So that is going to continue to be a thorn in the side of the automakers as they try to be strategic about what they're looking at. 2026, we'll see the increases come. I'm not sure we'll see them as huge still as everyone was anticipating them initially, but invariably they're going to have an impact on the cost structure and cost pressures for automakers.
Sure. Well, speaking of the future, you mentioned that the market is ripe for disruption. What kinds of disruption do you foresee?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is we have to question this affordability gap. Well, and to your point, this morning, I'm just throwing it out there, and there's plenty of people who believe this might happen. But if China is one of the biggest games that's being played right now with, President Trump, we know that there's an argument to be made. Well, what if part of a final deal includes Chinese manufacturers being able to come over here, manufacture here? I don't know that they'd be allowed to import here, but manufacture here. And that could drive a lot of competition. And honestly, some would say rightful competition to get less expensive vehicles into the market and into the hands of the customers. We need it not just for people who want to buy new vehicles, but we need it for the used car market to continue to sustain itself. Because we're going to, if we are only putting $100,000 used vehicles back into the market, we're still ending up with used vehicles that are too expensive for people to purchase, especially in that 1 to 3 year range. So I think that it's ripe for disruption, for just trying to figure out what is that magic thing you can do to get the car less affordable, more affordable for people. And I think we're going to see decontenting. So I think that's part of the disruption. That's an old bag of tricks that the automakers will certainly go to. Where can we strip some things out to hold MSRP where it is? So I think that that's certainly there. And as we know, and this is Cox Automotive's sweet spot from a software perspective, is just that omni-channel retailing. Like, how is that going to continue to influence the market where consumers can really research, shop, and then buy wherever they feel like doing that? So I think that's going to be a big component as well.
Sure. So how is it you're advising dealers with all of this information and with this report and such? What are you telling dealers?
Yeah, I mean, the trick of it is the subprime customer is the one that is likely the most hungry or needing a vehicle. It's probably held on to their vehicle longer and needing a vehicle. How do you work with the subprime customer, especially in light of some of the things that have been in the news lately? Tricolor, I think is how they pronounced it, the auto holdings. My good friend Andy Mayers has been on a bunch of different podcasts in the industry talking about, follow him, see what some of his clues are on how to manage the subprime customer. But also, how do we continue to help consumers see that even if this car doesn't have every bell and whistle that you think you should deserve and want in this vehicle, how does this still solve your problem of the transportation need? Because otherwise, I think consumers are too conditioned to come in and go, but why can't I have everything? Why can't I have, sell what you've got on the lot? Just really, butter up those skills of being able to point that customer to what will get them moving the fastest.
Sure.
And get strategic with your automakers on how do you really get strategic about ordering vehicles for the future. What do you need on your lot? Get creative with trade-ins and so forth. And I think that's just, we're going to have to be looking at this and be conscious of the fact that we've got some people who might need wheels, but are a little bit, they're a little bit worried about what's going on, and they don't know exactly how to interpret it. And then the last thing I would say is there's no question that the total cost of ownership monthly, as we talk about TCO as like the life of the vehicle. No, I mean, how many people really look at that? The total cost of ownership monthly, when you include insurance, taxes, everything else, is still a really heavy burden, and it's not the only thing. So the monthly payments, like, how do dealers get better at talking to their customers about, hey, this is the monthly net I can offer you from an F&I perspective, but you got to consider this, this, and this. And how do you just help your consumers shape that financial picture for themselves so that they see themselves in that vehicle you have available for them?
That's right. They need the consultation of dealers
they do.
Now more than ever, right? I mean,
more than ever to make sense of it.
Yeah. The whole idea that, dealers are, some in the industry or some consumers out there, advocates will say, oh, the dealers are a thing of the past and we can deal directly with, manufacturers or get vehicles this way or that way. And it's like, you know what?
Nope.
You can't replace that dealer that's right smack dab in the middle making all 100%. Of this happen,
100%. I mean, and even when I just went to go buy my new car or lease it to get a handle on that EV credit, I was bound and determined to walk out of there with a light interior. I just was like, no, I won't do a black interior. Guess what the guy got me to do? Walk off the lot with black interior, right? So, remember, dealers, you guys have persuasive as hell guys in there.
Right.
Use your intelligence, use your emotional intelligence, your EQ to go ahead and get that consumer in the car you need to get off the lot. It'll work.
You found a closer, that's for sure.
So, always be closing.
That's right. Erin Keating, executive analyst at Cox Automotive. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's always great catching up. This is great content for our dealer audience. I know they're going to get a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Jim.